Everybody, and welcome to Tuesday Training. I hope you're having a fantastic week. As always,
we are live from Austin, Texas, right here at Insurance Syndicate headquarters. And man, we have a great show for you.
What is happening, man? It's Tuesday, and it's a couple minutes after 9 a.m., so you know what time it is. That means time for a little Tuesday Training. As promoted, we're going to have Mike Hartle in the chat here in a little bit, talking about CMS's final rule that they are proposing actually for 2027. I think we titled this video 2026 because I was thinking, hey, that's the next year. But really, this rule that they're outlining are proposed changes that will go into effect 2027. So get excited. We are going to dive in to quite a bit of it. Not everything, because it's a massive rule, but we will definitely go over a good chunk of it with you guys. Primarily going to focus on the areas that are going to impact you the most as the agent, right? Your daily activities, right? Your business, everything that you're going to deal with in a day-to-day atmosphere, right? There are a lot of changes for plans, etc. Some of the things, the burdens that they have to deal with, but we're going to focus more on some of the proposed changes that will impact us. And I have to tell you, like, after going through this, I am super excited. And this is one of the reasons I'm really excited to bring Mike Hartle on, because the first time I got to really interface with him a little bit and hear from him. And if you don't know Mike Hartle, get excited because you're about to meet one of the good guys in the industry for sure, and one of the most knowledgeable people that I've ever had a chance to chat with. I met him at Medicarians last year briefly, saw him on a panel. He had some great insights. And one of the things that stuck with me that he said was that regardless of all of the regulation, regardless of all of the corrections that we're dealing with in the space, the difficulties, the turbulence, whatever have you, he is still very bullish on the Medicare market. And I love that he said that. And that was honestly one of the overlying themes that I got from Medicarians last year, was that from all the top executives, all the top guys, honchos that know the business really, really well, the overarching theme that every one of them said was like, hey, it's turbulent right now. We don't know exactly how everything is going to shake out from some of the regulations that we were dealing with, and the fact that we had a new administration on the cusp of coming in. But they all said, every single one of them, and Mike certainly backed this up, that they're very bullish about the future of the Medicare space. So we're going to dive into a lot of that and show you, well, at least, again, these are proposed changes. None of this is finalized. Right, we will probably get updates on finalization somewhere in first quarter of next year. You know, usually that's how it goes. They drop these proposals usually October, November-ish, and then somewhere January, February-ish, maybe March, they come out with the absolute final rule and what is going to take effect. I will say that I am pretty bullish that some of these changes are definitely going to go into effect. I really feel like the new administration is out there and fighting for us and has us in their favor. I was one of the ones that even commented when the new administration came in. Some of the comments that Dr. Oz was making sounded like, hey, wait a second. I thought you were one of the good guys, but you're making some comments like that we have to be held as independent agents under even closer watch. But based on these final proposals that they're making, the proposals they're making for the final rule, they definitely have us in the favor as small business owners, small business people, that they want to deregulate some of these items that have been pushed on us and give us some more freedom to run our business. So get excited. We're going to dive into that. As always, this show is brought to you by DFY CRM. They make this show available for us. So if you're ever out there looking for a good CRM, give those guys a holler. But without further ado, I'm going to grab Mike, bring him onto the stage, let him introduce himself real quick and get this thing going. What's going on, my friend? How are you doing, sir? Uh-oh, you freezing up on us? Mike is taking his son to school. Like, that's what a dope guy he is, right? He's out there taking his son to school and dropping him off in the morning. What are you doing, brother? You got me?
Can you hear me, Tony?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, yeah, sorry guys. Mission accomplished. Sun has dropped off. I've got my truck, just Cybertruck, driving me to work. So don't
Oh,
mind me.
nice. Nice. I
Just
like it. I like it.
chauffeuring myself.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
real quick.
To kind of echo
Yeah, go ahead.
a bit of a delay, but just to kind of echo some of the things you'd said, I am still very bullish on the industry. We've had a lot of bad news, I would say, in as an insurance agent over the past 2 years. And honestly, this CMS proposed final rule was like a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. I feel like for me, it kind of felt a little bit like CMS had abandoned us for this year. And, I really think that as Dr. Oz got in and CMS, this new administration took over, they have to do like anything. They have to triage their priorities. And some of their priorities were rooting out the mass fraud, waste, and abuse, and correcting out some of these. They call them agents, but a lot of them were massive fraud entities. And we're seeing a lot of those, especially on the ACA side, getting prosecuted, getting rooted out of the industry, and those guys were committing fraud to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So, and billions of dollars. So it's nice to see that they've kind of refocused and they're giving the Medicare side of things some hope. I was particularly enthused because some of the things that we've been complaining about as agents are addressed as possible solutions, or things that they want to address. The obvious easy one is the 48-hour scope. Potentially going away. And I think most agents, I don't know how long you've been in the industry, Tony, but I've been in, I used to sell belly to belly about 18 years ago. And a lot of agents don't even know why we have a scope of appointment. And, ultimately it came from back in the day where, a enterprising agent would walk into a house and come out with a bundle, and they would have sold a client a Medicare policy, a life insurance policy, an indemnity, and they would walk out of the door with an all-in, price of X amount of dollars, and the client didn't really know where the Medicare policy stopped and where these other financial products started. So to protect the seniors, they came out with a scope, like, let's tell about everything, the products that you can talk about at this appointment and what you can't. And so that's the intent, which it's pretty easy with today's technology, a recorded call or something like that to get the scope of what you talked about or have a client sign that. But just this, so many of these different things that they put in place, with good intentions or not, have just become so cumbersome for the consumer and for the agents as well.
Dude, absolutely, man. And I'm glad you brought that up because I, like you, have been in the industry a long time, and I used to sell belly to belly. I was out in the field selling Medicare supplements and final expense before there were any Medicare Advantage plans, before there were any standalone Part D plans, before there was really any hospital indemnity or really good critical illness policies, before there was any good dental products to even sell. Like, I was out there slinging, and all we had was basically Medicare supplements, final expense. That was it. And to kind of reinforce what you said, a big part of why they brought the scope out was not only exactly everything he said in regards to bundling of products and making sure people understood exactly what they were getting into, but there were agents that were out there slinging Medicare Advantage plans when they first came out as $0 Medicare supplement plans. And I don't know that all of them were doing it fraudulently by any means. As a matter of fact, I would say the bulk of agents weren't doing that fraudulently. They were doing it through a lack of education and awareness of what was happening. So because of that year, 2005 and 6, basically, we have all the certifications, we have the scope, we have some of these regulations. But it had become a runaway train of regulations in the last several years, the last few years at least. And now, exactly like you said, I feel like this new administration believes in us. They're fighting for us. They have our side, and they are unwinding some of these cumbersome things for us, but then also just kind of confuse the client, create more issues than are necessary. And like, for example, on the 48-hour rule, if you think about that, if you and I sign a document together, like scope of appointment, and then I wait 48 hours or possibly longer, depending on our available schedules, to call you and actually present plans, you probably don't remember everything that we talked about in that first call going over the scope. You've already forgotten about it. So it only makes sense to me that the scope should 100% be there, and then let's immediately start talking about plans and benefits that I can actually help you with.
Yeah, and let's be honest, for all intents and purposes, I think if we're all being real, most agents have kind of done that, whether it's a walk-in or your call's an inbound call, because it does confuse the consumers. It's very it almost has the opposite effect. A lot of these compliance regulations, where when you follow the rules or you read the TPMO disclaimer, the clients go, why are you saying that? Why are you doing that? That doesn't lead for more confidence. It leads to more confusion and almost distrust. And so I think that's really important to note. And I would encourage all the agents to go make comments as such, because that's what CMS is asking in this proposed final rule.
I agree with that. I've heard from some agents that say, hey, don't bother making comments because they don't pay attention to them. But I don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe that is if you go back to the last big final rule that the previous administration did, when they finalized their proposal, in that finalization, they addressed all of the comments that we gave them. And they said, hey, we got a lot of comments on this, but we're going to stick to our guns. Or we got a lot of comments on this, we're going to take that under advisement. Or we got comments on this, so we're not going to finalize it yet, but it's still on the table for discussion. So I've heard some agents say, hey, don't bother make comments because they don't pay attention to them anyway. You're just wasting your time. I would disagree with that. I would say make some comments. Don't spend all your time and your wheels and your energy doing it. But if you have some solid comments to make some comments about it. Absolutely. Feel free. It's your profession that's on the line and being impacted. So yes, make some comments, positive or negative, whatever your feelings are. And if you really want to make good comments, write your representatives. Like that was one of the things that I did originally when some of the previous final rules came out that I felt were really negatively impacting us. Because I immediately wrote letters to all of my congressmen that represented me in the state of Texas in my area. It's like, hey, these are some things that we don't like, and this is why they're not good and how they're actually going to affect the beneficiary. You can't just write them and complain. Like you have to have some reasonable, some sound argument for why it's actually going to affect their constituents, their beneficiaries negatively. But if you can put those thoughts on paper, absolutely, man. Make comments and express your voice. Your voice is the most powerful tool that you have, and no one should ever silence that from you.
Yeah, one of the things that, as I've paid attention to a lot of the regulatory stuff, and just so you guys have some context, my brother and I own Agent Boost Marketing. We recently sold to AmeriLife. We're one of the larger transactions they've done on the health side in a while, and we do a lot of Medicare and ACA. And so we've been interfacing a lot with CMS directly. We've been having meetings with their leadership. We've been, going back to DC. And to Tony's point, one of the things that I'm always shocked with is how little even CMS actually knows about the industry that they're supposed to be regulating. And the same thing goes for our leaders, our politicians. And you see them talking about ACA and the current fight of the government shutdown and both sides will say things, and it's pretty obvious for those of us that are in the industry that they have no idea what they're talking about. They're just trying to talk about political points and score points on one side or the other, and they don't know the nuts and bolts or the actual realities of how these products are playing out in the marketplace and what the consumers are actually going through. And so I think it is important to make thoughtful comments. I think CMS has their birdies that they listen to. Of course, there are certain influential people that have the ear of CMS that actually can affect some policy and sway. But look, when agents and consumers get loud, it takes a long time, but CMS will eventually listen because they're forced to. And I feel like that's happened. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years. But I definitely feel like if the voices get loud enough, they have no choice but to listen. I think that's one of the things that why fraud became such a big focus of CMS is all of us lived through the Joe Namath call center days and the calls that were hitting our consumers, and we as agents in the industry complained so much and so loud so often that became a focal point of the industry over the past 2 or 3 years. So yeah, go make some comments. I don't know if you want to kind of address some of the other things line by line, Tony, but I just wanted to kind of give some, additional context, guys, as to where things are at with the industry as far as agents and us agents who are, I would say, left or remaining in the industry. But Tony kind of made some, he referenced some comments that Dr. Oz made when he took office. And I think you're probably referring to the fact that he said there's too many agents in the ecosystem and we got to get a lot of agents out. And I kind of was a little bit worried about that as well too, because obviously my business, I make money one of two ways: bring on more agents, write more policies, right?
Yep.
So if we're eliminating agents out of the ecosystem, to me that can potentially mean a harder thing. But when you look at it on the Medicare and ACA side, guys, the amount of agents that entered the space over the past 6 or 7 years, you have literally millions of agents that got into the space, whether it was through, and most of them got in through call centers, right? And what you had was the big GoHealth, eHealth, just continuing with this recruiting machine, dragging low quality, low acumen agents into the industry. And then you had on the ACA side the same thing, and a lot of these big box call centers thought it was quick, easy money, and so they were bringing in millions of people too, as long as agents on the field side too. So we literally had millions of agents in the industry. And how do agents make money? Well, they sell policies. So it almost becomes this the snake eating its own tail ecosystem where you have to create noise and marketing and churn because everybody's trying to get theirs. I like that. I'm from the 80s. I like that game Hungry Hippos, where the hippos used to slam the lever and the hippos would try to eat the marbles. That's what our industry became over the past 5 years, and so I think it's been really good for some of these changes that have happened over the past year and a half that are choking out some of these bad agents. They're catching them through fraud. They're catching them through continued compliance infractions. And then there's some market economics. This is the big one that have changed, that have essentially shut off the quick, easy money for a lot of these agents. And so I'm seeing lower quality, lower acumen agents leaving the industry in droves right now. And I think CMS is achieving their goal of getting less agents or keeping less agents in the industry. But what I think that's good for all of us, right? I think that's good
Agreed.
for all of us agents that are have made it through the past 2 years. And I think that I hate saying this because, I think, sometimes Trump overstates stuff, but it's like the golden age of Medicare again. That's what I really feel like. And I think this CMS call letter is a indicator of things getting better. 2026 kind of being the last of the lingering corrections, financially, compliance wise, structurally. And so I think that this letter that we're talking about is a good indicator of things to come, and that our voices are being heard.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I do want to go through a few of the items that are going to impact us positively and impact your beneficiaries positively, or our beneficiaries positively. We can't go through this whole thing, man. It is a pretty lengthy document, not as lengthy as some of the previous final rules. But just to give you an example, they have 14 topics that address various rule changes. A lot of them are plan specific. Some of them are plan reporting. Like, for example, one of the items is a Part D redesign. They're really not redesigning Part D. They're just codifying everything in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and pushing that forward properly. There's items on the manufacturer discount program, et cetera, et cetera. but I want to go through just a handful of items that are going to affect us directly as agents and our beneficiaries. One of those first ones that I love is the new SEP for provider terminations. So if the network is disrupted, they're going to make it easier for that beneficiary to gain an SEP. In past years, it would have to be an extremely significant change in their provider. But now, if a member is currently or recently seen a provider or a facility that is terminated from the network, just one provider, they can now become eligible for an SEP to revisit their plan. Yep. I feel like that's great for the beneficiary.
Yeah, a couple of things there. I think there needs to be, look, if we're all being honest, SEPs have been, there's a need for beneficiaries to change their plan mid-year. Yeah. And for the past couple of years, there's been different SEPs that agents have overused or call centers have abused, like DST when that was available. And I think there's a risk that we as agents over abuse this. And because I don't think, if you look at the recent CMS directory with the provider and how things change and how fluid that is, I don't think there's ever going to be a very good, accurate, up-to-date, instantaneous source of truth on provider directories and things like that. I think there's going to have to be a little bit of a trust factor there. But I think that it's good because we all know if you write Advantage, that's one of the major obstacles or one of the major concerns is, well, what happens, if my provider is no longer a network? That's a huge draw. And then you don't want to be stuck in a plan. And as we all know, that happens very frequently. I mean, it's the facilities and the doctors, they're always at war, renegotiating more money, trying to get theirs. And so I think that it's going to be a very good, valid SEP to use. And I think what that does is that gives us some valid legitimacy to be able to do good work during lock-in. I would just caution all the industry, like, let's not over abuse that, right? Like, and this is one thing I coach my agents too. There's a lot of SEPs out there. And, in general, you can find a valid SEP that you can use to help a consumer in need for the most part. If we all use and abuse and overload these valid SEPs, that's how we get, that's why we can't have nice things. We break things. And then, exactly. And I don't mean us good at, agents on this call, but you'll find a call center and they write 1,000 apps in a month and all 1,000 were doctor changes, and you go, that the other thing that it's nice, guys, is the carriers are getting wise to this stuff on their back end. And if your upline hasn't told you this so far, they're now running reports like on the front end, and they are being way more sophisticated with data on enrollment coming in than waiting for everything to kind of materialize on the back end. And so I get carrier reports now of like SEP usage for my agents. And if they're outliers, meaning like they're using an SEP that is questionable, I'll know about that before these enrollments even take effect. And I go over those on like my weekly carrier meetings. And so I think that'll be a good safeguard. So these like call centers and bad actor agents can't use and abuse those really good opportunities that we have. So I'm really hopeful about that. I also think that this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, and it's kind of related, but I'm sure you saw, Tony, that they just announced they're going to change how some of these star ratings are done for the better. And what I think is really good about that is with this last V28 reimbursement model, it overcorrected some of the reimbursement mechanisms for these insurance carriers, guys. And so that's affected payments downstream to doctors and facilities and everything. And so I think with that, there should be a little bit more breathing room or dollars in the ecosystem to where maybe these carriers and doctors facilities and doctors aren't having to fight at arms all the time over, being in network or being out of network, because it's been really chaotic over the past year and a half of these different doctors and facilities dropping out of network mid-year, having contract negotiations in the middle of the year. So I think that, yeah, that's a really good kind of meeting in the middle place of having a valid SEP and also, restoring some of those funding mechanisms that should create a little bit of relief as well.
Absolutely, man. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that while it is a great opportunity for another SEP that can help our beneficiaries, it is on us as agents. Do not abuse it, right? And use it properly. You're on this specific SEP. They're only going to be able to use it once during an event, right? But the plans are able to rely on a member's attestation on that SEP.
Yep.
So if they say, hey, my doctor is no longer in network, pretty much a termination letter can explain the SEP dates, the GI protections, all kinds of stuff. So it should be pretty interesting, and good for the beneficiary. But again, the onus is on us not to abuse it. One of the other ones that I love, absolutely love, because we're big on events. We don't do a lot of marketing events, but we love educational events, is that there's no longer the cooling off rule after your educational event, right? Currently, if you run an educational event, you have to wait 12 hours, right, in a cooling off period before you can do any actual marketing. Now you can run assuming it's approved in 2027, you will be able to run a marketing event immediately after your educational event, so long as it's properly announced and you follow the marketing guidelines. So if you're going to do a marketing event, obviously you got to have it registered with your carrier, all of those things. But you can preempt it with an educational event and then move right into your marketing event immediately in the same location. Another big thing they're adding to the marketing or the event rules is that they want to, or at least they're proposing to bring back the ability to collect scope of appointment at your educational events. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah. I built my entire book of business originally doing events, right? These were educational events and community meetings, and we would even do those at restaurants back in the day. I've been in the industry long enough where I could buy people a steak in the early days, right? And everything's just changed so much. And I think that for some reason, CMS and the government has always viewed seniors as so stupid and vulnerable that they just have to be protected from themselves, and I think that as some of these politicians and leaders start approaching Medicare age themselves, they're going, hey, not everybody's a 90-year-old decrepit invalid on Medicare that has dementia. We got to stop treating all these seniors like that. It's almost disrespectful, and to basically say you can't go to a marketing event and receive information in person and then decide that you want to make an enrollment. We create so many different barriers for these seniors to get the information and make a decision, that this is what we've all been talking about, is it's become so convoluted and so much more complicated for these seniors, where you're like, oh, I can buy you this, you can eat this pretzel, but as long as it doesn't go over $15, and I can't enroll you right now, but if you wait 12 hours, you can come back and I can enroll you then. It's, you look at it from a macro perspective and you go, what the hell are we doing? This is so confusing. And so I think that they're going to probably even go further on a lot of these marketing events and just allow, it should be like any of these other products, right? That people are able. Look, we don't protect seniors from buying a home. We don't protect seniors like this from spending their dollars on everything else in their entire life. Why do we treat them like they're incapable of making intelligent market decisions on Medicare? And so I think that we will see that return to that. And I think that's great for field agents, because one of the dynamics that's emerged, Tony, over the past, let's call it the COVID years and the post-COVID years, is everything became so call centric, mostly because everything clamped down so hard on these marketing events and being able to provide, buy a consumer a meal or take them somewhere in person or do an educational event, that everything, and then with the 48-hour scope, it unintentionally drove everything towards more telephonic enrollments. Because if we're agents, we're like, well, how the hell do I market compliantly? I guess I can get inbound calls, and then I don't have to do the 48-hour scope of appointment, and I can have it all recorded right there. And so unintentionally, CMS has created all these rules where it's made it so these good local field agents have a harder time doing legitimate business and doing educational events. And it's almost unintentionally steered all this business towards more telephonic enrollments, right?
Yep.
And I think that you're going to see the evolution where that comes back, where you can have good field agents be doing these events. Because, back in the day, I used to run events with 30, 40, 50 people. I'd pitch, a particular plan there, and I'd walk out with 6 to 8 enrollments on the spot. Those days are gone for most agents, and I know there's some agents that are still able to do that in particular areas, smaller, mid-market, rural areas, but the compliance metrics and all the rules have become so onerous that doesn't work. It's hard to get a good ROI between the marketing and then the actual implementation of the compliance there, that most agents just say, to hell with it. That's too hard to do those things. And so I'm really excited about that. I think that'll make it good for good agents to be able to have quality marketing and educational events and actually get a good ROI out of those events.
Agreed, man. We built a good part of our business over here at Avila doing educational events, mainly going after the T65 space. And one of my favorite parts about doing those events was not just that they're educational, they're only educational, so I get a little more freedom in what I can talk about. I obviously can't talk about plan benefits and specifics and cost, but I can talk about the basics of Medicare, flex my knowledge. But at the end of every event, we would have, because they had a folder with documents in it. And in those documents was their PTC form and their SOA. So we could have, and an intake form, right, that had some basic questions on it. I was still able to keep the PTC in there. We're still able to keep the intake form in there, but we had to pull the SOA. And then now I call that client. Then I get an SOA after I've already educated them, but then I have to wait another 48 hours before I can come back. Like it made the whole process very cumbersome, confusing. And this leads right into the TPMO disclaimer. Mm-hmm. They are tweaking the disclaimer. Couple of core things. They're not getting rid of it. You're still going to have to use your disclaimer, whether you're selling face-to-face or by phone. It still has to be within the first 60 seconds to some level, but only on a actual enrollment call, right? When you only have to deal with the disclaimer if you're going to present benefits. I always kind of thought it was that way, but they're adding that to be a little more clear. Like, hey, it's not a 60-second clock on every call or the first call. We just want you to drop the disclaimer before you start
tell that to these carriers' compliance officers. Good luck trying to tell that to these carriers' compliance officers. They read, oh, you didn't, no matter what, every call, you didn't say this within 60 seconds, so, founded. So it's just another one of these examples of how convoluted it is.
Right. So I like that they're clarifying that you don't have to use the disclaimer until you're actually going to talk benefits. But then also they're shrinking the disclaimer. You don't have to reference SHIP. Again, this is proposed. Don't take what I'm saying and start running with it. But this is all proposed, that they're going to simplify it. You don't have to use the disclaimer until you're actually going to present benefits. And number two, you do not have to refer them to SHIP anymore. Not to mention, I think SHIP is getting defunded and probably on its way out the door anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans don't like the SHIP model, and they're in control right now, and it's been basically independently proven that it's much less effective, right? Those counselors are much less knowledgeable. The barrier to entry is much lower than an independent insurance agent. This TPMO thing was the most exciting for me and also the most interesting, if I could kind of go deep on a few things.
Absolutely.
Just so you guys know, we, Agent Boost, we own and operate our own virtual agency. I don't call it a call center. I never have. We spun it up pre-COVID. It was one of the major ways where we grew. But I have independent agents that get paid a residual component. They do business over the phone nationwide. We don't run a eHealth or a GoHealth model where I flood people a bajillion inbound calls and they do a crappy, one-time enrollment. I have a virtual agency, and we write a lot of business over the phone nationwide. We also coach and train our agents nationwide. I say now, if I'm being honest, we write about 65% of our business is done over the phone nationwide versus about 35% in the field and through sub agencies. And I think that component will always exist. So the TPMO was really interesting to me. And they, as we all know, the TPMO disclaimer where you have to say I represent so many carriers, it's very convoluted, right? It's very hard to explain what that means to a consumer. It doesn't ingratiate more trust. It's just an obstacle there. But they talked about all those things Tony just said, and then they pontificated on the value of even having any call recordings at all for Medicare enrollments. And I thought that was really interesting, because the way that the industry's developed right now, guys, is I'm sure maybe some of you on the call have had a complaint, that comes in telephonic. And what happens a lot of times is if you enroll somebody over the phone, even if that agent's a good agent, and this is one of the things that I think is very interesting. You have this dichotomy of telephonic agents and field agents. And if I meet with somebody in person, only me and that client and God know what I said, right? For the most part. And there's also a much less propensity for an agent to complain if you've met with somebody face to face or whatnot. And if there's ever a he said, she said, as long as the agent, the client signed the documents there, you have way more cover. And I know some agents that just completely shortcut stuff, and they, not in a bad way, a lot of times you're meeting with a consumer that's been your client for 12 years. You don't want to sit down with them and go, let me read you this TPMO disclaimer and they're going, dude, what are you doing? Tell me about the plan. And my point is, telephonic agents now at this current time are held to a much higher level of scrutiny than a field agent. And what happens is, even if you're a good agent and you do a high volume of business, you're eventually going to get in trouble with CTMs, with Medicare, with these carriers, because it's become so difficult to have a perfect compliant call. And these carriers, it's another mechanism for them eliminating agents, because they don't want the business right now, guys. They're using CTMs and compliance as a way to basically knock out agents and term agents out of the industry without actually saying that. And so you might have a good telephonic agent and you get a complaint against you that and 75% of these guys are no consent to enroll. Basically, they'll call up a carrier and be like, oh, I didn't enroll. I didn't enroll with that person. And you'll pull the recorded call, and very clearly they knew what they consented, but the carrier will have investigated that call, and they'll be like, well, yes, they did consent to enroll, but you didn't say the TPMO disclaimer perfect, or you didn't say it in the first minute, or you forgot to ask about the consumer specialist, and so it's a founded complaint, right?
Yep.
And then these founded complaints add up, and then all of a sudden you have pretty well-intentioned agents a lot of times getting knocked out of the industry or getting termed with carriers, and it's pretty common. And so not only that, but here's the secret, guys. If a consumer calls in to a carrier and they have an issue, let's say it's with a provider, right? Let's say they were in network, or the consumer's tool said it was, and it turns out they weren't really, and they want to they need to change their plan. Tony, what does that agent on the phone do so they can change their plan?
Pretty much whatever they can.
They go, the only way I can help you is if you file a complaint. I can create a CTM.
Oh, yes.
If you file a CTM, I can create an SEP where I can move you to a different plan. And
Yes.
So what we have, guys, is we have this ecosystem that it's eating itself. That CMS wants to protect these consumers, and they think they want to protect fraud with all of these rules and all these compliance regulations. But the reality is most of the fraud isn't coming through an agent doing a bad job, a not thorough job on the phone, or misspeaking. most of the fraud's coming through people who aren't following any of these rules anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So you have the carriers and you have CMS spending billions of dollars on time listening to calls and checking compliance, and and each carrier spending billions of dollars on their compliance teams, and me and Tony doing countless meetings about and beating the agents over the head about compliance and saying this perfect, and there's so much time spent on that. And then in the call, basically CMS says, what's the point of all this? Kind of,
Right.
you know, in that letter, they say, is this really having the intended consequence that we want? And Medicare is the only product that's overseen by HHS and CMS that requires these things. We're not requiring those same things in ACA. We're not requiring these same things if I switch my employer plan. I don't have to have a required call and TPMO disclaimers and all this other stuff. If I sell you small group insurance, or I sell you a short-term plan, this is the only damn policy, the only product that is so heavily scrutinized, and then everything else has nothing, you know? And so they this is what I thought was so fascinating, is they said, comment on that, you know, like, is what we're doing actually protecting the consumers, or should we have no call recordings at all and just hold everything to the same standard that we do these other carriers or these other products? Or should we just have a really slimmed down, you only need to record the summary of, you know, the sales portion of the call, and everything else is just kind of, you know, more held to these other standards? And so I thought that was really fascinating, because as somebody who lives and breathes and talks about this stuff, I think the compliance stuff has become this runaway train in our industry, where I go, I don't even know that it's, yes, occasionally you find a bad agent that's just doing a high volume of enrollments, that's shortcutting people, and you know, not doing a thorough job on the phone. They're not asking for doctors. They're not checking meds. They're doing a surface level enrollment, you know?
Right.
But is that really spending all these billions of dollars and all this focus and time, effort, and energy? Is that really saving more consumers and doing a better job than if we just treated these like other products, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the things that was my major takeaway from that letter, was and more than anything, it's a good indication of CMS questioning the wisdom of why are we doing these certain things, right? And this is what I think is a good place to maybe you know, take away from this call, is CMS is open to looking at all these different things and saying, hey, why are we doing this, versus, you know, the age-old government where all of a sudden we've got a 70,000 page tax code where we just keep adding on things, and it eventually becomes so convoluted that nobody knows what the hell we're supposed to be doing, and it's hard for everybody to follow. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's a really good indicator from CMS in general, that they're open to questioning all of the inefficient bureaucratic things that we do in Medicare, and trying to make it a better experience overall for the consumer and the agent. And I know they're going to be more sophisticated and savvy at finding and catching fraudulent agents, and not just punishing a new agent that, you know, didn't know better, or, well, you did it over the phone, so you must be a fraudster. You know what I mean? I think that they're going to be doing a much better job of that. But overall, there's some really good indicators in this letter of just the thoughts and the sentiment of CMS towards the industry.
Agreed 100%. Dude, you couldn't have said that better. I mean, number one, if we look, just like you said, like all of the administrative burden that is placed on CMS, right, on the carriers, on us as agents, but ultimately at the executive level, at the CMS level, like all of the time that they have to spend, the staff that they have to hire to listen to calls, to listen to complaints, to deal with all this, all that does is increase the expense of Medicare. Ultimately. But is it really,
tens
to
of
your
billions,
point,
hundreds of billions of dollars?
right,
Yep.
is it really helping the beneficiary at the end of the expense, right? 100%. And You said it perfect. Like that's a huge takeaway from reading through this and understanding like they're really looking at these things and saying, hey, there's a bunch of administrative bullshit in here.
Yep.
Do we really need it all? Is it just convoluting the process? Is it helping the beneficiary, or is it just increasing our administrative workload? Period. Right. And then we'll get one more item out of the way because we're touching on it right now with call recordings. They're certainly not looking at least in the proposal, they're not looking at eliminating call recordings, but they are looking at trimming them down and basically splitting them into two buckets: sales calls and service calls type stuff, or let's say sales calls, really, right? Service calls do not need to be recorded. They don't even address them, but they're having sales calls and enrollment calls. They're saying they both want them to be recorded, but retention is different. If it's just a sales call, like, hey, Jim, thanks for got your lead response, blah, 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 where you would still need to do the disclaimer, that would only need to be retained for 6 years. And the actual enrollment call, right, assuming that you're selling by phone, needs to be retained for 10 years. So they're not getting rid of call recording, at least based on the proposal, but they are trying to reduce the administrative workload of it and the burden of it so that it's a little clearer on what do I need to record, how long do I need to keep that recording, right?
Yeah, look, the scope of appointment thing, this is a good example. I talked about when I was growing up in the industry, we had to keep our paper scopes of appointment for 10 years. And I had a credenza that I literally just got rid of 4 years ago that I'd saved thousands of paper scopes of appointments because I had to keep them for 10 years. Do you know how many times I needed to reference one of those scopes that I saved for 10 years?
Never. I would say maybe once.
I never did. I literally had to save thousands of scopes of appointments for 10 years in a paper thing long beyond this, just because it was some rule. And that's what CMS referenced, is they said, even 6 years, how often are we going back and saying, 5 years ago, what did you say on this recorded call? I mean, it's the statute of limitations on that is crazy. And I think that's another one where they may go, are we really needing to save all these calls for 10 years, or is 3 years or something like that sufficient? Do we really need to put the onus of all of this data storage? And, because look, guys, if you run a big entity like we do you know how much money we spend on data storage, on back end, on paying things like Twilio and Amazon Web Service? We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million plus a year, just on being able to save and store and access these recordings if in case we need it, Yeah. And you start extrapolating that out all across the industry, like we were saying before, and you go, for what?
Right.
Are we really going to need to know what the full scope of a call was 4 years ago for a plan that's probably not even in the market? Probably
Exactly.
not,
Probably not. I have to spend. It cost me a little over $1,000 per user for my cloud service.
Yep.
So that I can have all my agents' calls stored. Like it's thousands of dollars every year that I'm dropping on something that I'll probably never need. At least exactly. I certainly won't need it more than a year. I will say that we've, in our entirety in the last 5 years, we've had, unfortunately, 2 CTMs. They were both unfounded because we had all the documentation. We had the scope. We had the call recording. We did it all by the book. And certainly it was just a cut and dry thing. But those were within a year old. Like the mathematical probability that I'm going to get a CTM that would have to reference a call recording 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10 years ago, I would bet all of my money that it will never happen.
Yeah. I mean, almost all CTMs happen within the first 3 months of enrollment taking effect. And I would say the rest of them happen within the first 6 months. Almost none come in after the first 6 months of the enrollment comes in. You'll have a rare CTM within the first year. I can't even think of a CTM that we've got over a year old. Right. I can't even think of one.
We hit on this earlier, but let's hit it one more time. Why do you think most CTMs occur in the first 90 days?
I mean, it's access to, they show up and either something wasn't like they thought, either the doctor isn't in network for whatever reason, or it's a medication. Between doctors and meds, that's 90% of all CTMs, right? The agent either thought a doctor was in network or didn't cover it sufficiently, or a medication thing. They didn't cover it properly. They didn't ask about the meds. They gave the wrong copayment. They didn't talk about something like, step therapy or something like that. And that's 80-90% of all CTMs.
Absolutely.
And the problem is, carriers should easily be able to solve these things, or a lot of times it's a carrier problem. They didn't get their card, then they're frustrated. Certain carriers are notorious for that. We all know the WellCares, the Molinas, those second tier carriers where their operations aren't very good. Well, and then the consumer calls up and the customer service rep goes, "Oh, well, do you want to file a complaint on that agent?" And they're like, "Sure, I'm mad. I can't go to my doctor that I thought." Yeah, let's file a complaint on that person. And then the process gets escalated. Or another agent is mad that somebody else took their client and coaches that consumer to call up and make a complaint. So
yep. That's
those are
kind of where I
two.
was getting at with that.
Yeah, and those, I detest agents like that. I'll be honest. All you're doing is you're not solving the problem. You're contributing. You're exacerbating a regulatory environment that's already bad, most likely because you got your feelings hurt because you weren't doing a good job, or you just, it just happens. If you do this business long enough, somebody's gonna change their plan. It doesn't matter how much fruitcake they gave you during Christmas or how many times you've met with them. You're gonna eventually lose a client, and you can just get them back. You don't need to. You don't need that.
100%. I agree with you on that. I detest agents that are in that space. We're like, oh, well, let's call and file a complaint so we can get an SEP so that I can re-enroll you and win you back in my book.
Exactly.
And from the 2 complaints that we've gotten the last 5 years, from all the research that I did and preparing all the documentation myself to turn them into the carriers that asked for them, and I looked through it to see what did the agent do anything wrong? Like, I'm investigating because I want to find out so I can coach them up. And I realized, like, none of this is founded. Like, you clearly have the call, you have the client on there, you've done everything by the book, we have every documentation. And in looking at it, I kind of came to the conclusion that both of those complaints were agent encouraged by the alternate agent that we took the business from.
Well, and here's the thing. This is what's frustrating, Tony, and this goes back to my point about CMS questioning the whole wisdom of what we're doing with that ecosystem. There's no recourse ever. If a client calls up and makes a complaint against an agent and it was a great enrollment, what's the recourse? There's no accountability to that client. You only have negative upside or negative downside as an agent. Like you don't get vindicated in any way. You don't get like, oh, good job. Here's a get out of jail free card the next time you get you have a complaint issue. I listened to these complaints because, like I said, we do a lot of telephonic enrollments, and I would say 95% of them, the agent generally tried to do a pretty good job, and it was some minor detail of this laundry list of really egregious compliance things that, oh, you forgot, you summarized the disclaimer at the end, or you forgot to mention the star ratings on the phone call, and you're like, come on, man. Have you ever live talked to a human for an hour and a half? Even when you're following a template, you're talking to another human being. It's hard to be perfect all the time. And the analogy that my brother and I use is, if you're a policeman and you follow somebody driving for 2 hours, you're probably eventually going to find something that you could pull them over for. You're going to find that they rolled through a stop a little bit quicker than 3 seconds, or they forgot to use their blinker. And you're going to find what you're looking for if that's what your whole process is.
Absolutely. So, if you're looking for problems, you can find problems.
Yeah. And look, I just think that we as an industry with tech and AI, we're going to get way more savvy and sophisticated at rooting out this fraud. I can tell you who's doing fraud. I'll talk to a call center that'll call me and want to do business. And I'm like, how many enrollments are your reps doing? They're like, 50 a week each. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're a fraudulent agency, or you guys are writing really crappy business, you know? I'm like, it's impossible to do a good quality needs analysis and write that volume of business. That would be very easy for me. I can tell you, you don't need, what I'm saying is you don't need all this egregious nanny state compliance stuff to find and catch the people who are doing fraudulent activities.
Right.
And that's what I think CMS is starting to realize as well. And at a potential cost savings, guys, because this is really what it all loops back to, is if we can't start saving some money in the ecosystem and start redeploying some of these dollars in Medicare where we can properly fund these plans, we're not going to get out of the situation we're in where these plans don't have the proper funding right now and they keep going non-commissionable and suppressed, and the carriers don't want the freaking business right now in a lot of these states. If we can't reallocate some of these dollars and save some money and put them into the good aspects of where Medicare needs funding, then we're just going to keep having a really hard, difficult years year over year.
Yep. Spot on, brother. Man, I super appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to drop by. We're coming up to the top of the hour. So I just want to invite you, any final thoughts, words of wisdom on the future of our Medicare industry?
I'll give a shameless plug. I put out a podcast every week called Agent Boost Marketing Podcast, anywhere you can find podcasts, and on YouTube. So, if you guys want to, if anything I said was valuable, but I would just say any of you agents that are on this call, investing time to educate yourselves, you're the exact type of agent that the industry needs. And I know you guys are going to be successful. And I really do feel that the next 5 years, we're going to enter in a really good space for not just Medicare, but Medicare and ACA and health insurance. We're going to clean up a lot of this stuff. And for those of us who have survived these last couple of hard years, I think you're going to be really rewarded for being a good agent, and you're going to be able to grow a nice, good, healthy book that has good retention, right? A good ROI, a good lifetime value of those policies. And we're going to see the return of people sticking on your books for 5 to 7 years plus, not just this always, I always got to be replacing my bottom half of my book continually because there's so much chaos. And I would just say, put your heads down and keep working, do a good job for your clients, and become the type of agent that the industry needs.
Love it. Love it, man. Dude, Mike is one of the good guys out there. I promise you. I've been following him for a while. I got to meet him at Medicarians. I super appreciate you coming on and dropping some knowledge for us. How can people reach out to you if they want to chat with you, maybe see what's going on at Agent Boost?
Yeah, my email is Mike at Agent Boost. We're pretty easy to find. You can message me on Facebook, since you're all on Facebook, or my personal stuff on Instagram and Facebook, and all the socials are pretty much intertwined with the professional stuff. So message me anyway. My email is Mike at Agent Boost. It's really, really difficult.
There you go. Nice and easy. Well, man, thank you again for stopping in. Have yourself an awesome day out there. And thank you guys for tuning in. That is a Tuesday training for today. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Tony.
You got it.